Attention, fans of Unfinished Business Television. We're thrilled to announce our proud partnership with Super 7, the ultimate destination for collectors and pop culture enthusiasts alike. When you shop at Super 7, you're not just getting amazing collectibles, you're supporting us. Use our exclusive link, super7.com/AJEPYX, and remember to enter the promo code AJEPYX at checkout. Your purchases help us bring you even better content, sharper production, and the quality you deserve. So what are you waiting for? Visit super74.com/AJEPYX today. Use promo code AJEPYX, and let's keep the good times rolling here at Unfinished Business Television.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to another episode of Unfinished Business Television. As you can see, we have a guest with us, but before I introduce him, there is my co-host, Andre Joseph of AJ Epics, of course.
I have no special quote today because this is a dream come true today for me.
It is. And our guest, if you grew up a science fiction, fantasy, television fan, this man is probably part of the reason. In his career lifetime, which is still going, he has created, written, and directed the following shows and movies that rocked your world and helped develop your imagination. V, the miniseries, The Incredible Hulk, The $6 Million Man, The Bionic Woman, Alien Nation, the TV series, various TV movies, Short Circuit 2, and Steel, to name just a few. And when he wasn't doing that as a true Renaissance man, he was composing music, songs, and scores for Alien Nation, the series, and Steel. He is quite the dynamo, a true legend a few times over, and a man who has the same name as one of my uncles until he changed his name to his African name. We are honored to have with us the legendary Mr. Kenneth Johnson.
Hello, gentlemen. Hello, Jeff. Thank you. That's an overwhelming introduction. I don't know how I will be able to keep up with it. But I'm what name did your relative change his to?
Kwame.
Okay, Kwame Johnson. I like that. Maybe I'll think about that on my next credits. You know.
Okay. Be an interesting fit.
So, Ken, thank you so much for coming on. I've been a huge fan of your work for many years. I remember seeing Short Circuit 2 in the theater with my parents, but it was my dad who actually introduced me to V back when I was a big Star Wars fan in the 90s. He was telling me, like, oh, you got to watch this thing that was out back when you were born. And I was like so blown away by it. And we're not going to talk about the final battle and all that other stuff. You had nothing to do with that. We're talking about the original 1983 miniseries. And you know, I'm just geeking out right now because it's such an honor and a privilege to have you on. So for our audience, what got you started in television?
Well, I always wanted to I had always focused on movies. I started in theater because when I was in high school, I had done some acting, and without realizing it, I had started to do some producing and directing because I'd sort of coordinate a number of the drama pieces that I was in. And I realized very quickly when I got in front of an audience and was telling them a story and feeling a reaction coming back from them, that was what I wanted to do. I said, I realized I need to be in the theater, and I wasn't thinking about TV or film or anything at that time. It was really just strictly theater, and where my interest was. And I got into Carnegie Tech in the drama department there. It's now Carnegie Mellon University. The drama department, which I didn't realize because I'd never heard of it until I applied to them, goes back roots back into the 1910, 1915, and they were a very famous theater school. It was very hard to get into, apparently. But I managed to get in, and it was a theater school. There was no film or television. They were very stringent about, well, we do theater here, and motion pictures. Well, I don't know, but television, oh, certainly not television. So the focus was on theater and on training and learning to the whole Stanislavski method of acting. And as a directing major there, you had to, which is what I was in as, you had to take all the same classes the actors did, and you had to take all and do the acting, and you had to be on the stage and doing it yourself. And part of that was why I have sort of a leg up when I came to Hollywood finally to work in film, was because so few film directors out here I discovered have much theater background training, and they don't know how to talk to actors. And I hear this from actors all the time. And when I can sit down with an actor for the first time and say, "Okay, tell me what your process is." Well, as soon as you say that to an actor, they know that you know what you're talking about. I got to talk to them, and it was a leg up that really helped me all the way along. And so very quickly, I did some film and a little bit in New York after I graduated from Carnegie, and it was only live TV I could get into. I went to after graduating in Pittsburgh and going to New York. I said, "Here I am, ready to make movies," and they said, "Why did you come to New York?" Oh, they weren't making that many, I realized, and ultimately I had a wife and child already by that time, and had to feed the family, and so I got into television first at CBS and then at one of the big local stations in New York, WPIX, where I was a producer director at age 22 in Manhattan, which was a big deal, and we had a couple of big hit shows, and but it was not what I wanted to do. I kept, leaning toward film more and more, and I went through another couple of television experiences like that. After success in New York as a producer director, I was invited to join the Mike Douglas show, which in the late 60s and 70s, early 60s when I was there, was the first and major talk show in daytime. It was the first daytime 90-minute talk show, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make films, but I had interned with them when I was still in college, and they came back and said, "Look, we really want you to be a producer with us. There's a young executive producer. He's only a few years older than you are. He's just taken over the show. We'd like to have you just go meet him." And I said, "I don't know, just go meet the guy." His name was Roger Ailes. Yeah, wait, not the Orson Wellesian, corpulent guy that with the child molester, the white woman molester, not that guy. But he was just young, brash, bright, and scrappy, and didn't want to give away his shot. He seduced me. He was good at that, into coming aboard and doing this 90-minute talk show 6 times a week. But he said, "Kenny, I want to do a lot of film, and I'll let you do a lot of film there." And I said, "Well, that's great." He said, "Yeah, you can do all the film you want as long as we get our 90 minutes live done every day, 6 days a week." So it was sort of became my hobby to try to get the film stuff done. Well, in the meantime, I was meeting everybody in the world because it was a hugely popular show, 10 times more audience than Oprah ever had. And everybody in the world came through, and you got to sit down and meet with Robert Kennedy or Martin Luther King, or as well as all the movie stars and such. And but it was still, I wasn't happy. I wanted to go make movies. And in 1968, Nixon came to the show, and Roger grabbed him and said, "I can get you elected president." And, and Nixon said, "How can you do that, Roger?" And Roger said, "You need a media advisor." And Nixon said, "What's a media advisor?" Right? It was a term Roger had made it up. Anyway, Roger went off with Nixon. Nixon hired him. He got him elected, and then went on to become the big mogo for all the Republican candidates, and then created Fox News. And after he created MSNBC, nobody knows about that one too. But and they asked me to take over the show, and I wanted to go to California and make movies, but Roger said, "Look, just do 1 season at the show. It's a big credit. You'll be the youngest executive producer of a major show in the industry." And so I spent 9 more months there before I finally came out to California and said, "Okay, California, here I am, ready to make movies." And they said, "No, you're a talk show producer." And it's like, oh, yes. It was like that. And my friend, college mate, classmate Steve Bochco, was a young writer. He had this was long before he created Hill Street Blues and L.A. Law and NYPD Blue and so all the hits. He had just gotten his foot in the door at Universal and as a writer and said, "Look, Kenny, actors can do bit parts and work their way up. I mean, Dustin Hoffman, Gary Cooper, they all started as bit players, and then somebody said, 'Oh my God, this guy's a star,' you know." And he said, the actors can do that. Writers, you can write on spec. You can write a spec script, and nobody's paying you for. But if you sell it, hey, then you get your foot in the door. And maybe if they like it a lot, they'll let you direct it. And I said, but Steve, I'm not a writer. When I was at Carnegie, I took all the classes that everybody else did, the actors, the costume designers, the lighting designers. The writing classes were the anathema. I just didn't think I was any good and didn't have any chops for that. But Steve just kept beating me up until he just said, do it. And I finally started writing and discovered that I could write and that I could write pretty fast. And I became a prolific writer of unproduced screenplays, most of which are still up in my office on the shelf, That's truly. But one of them, Steve really liked it, took it to an executive producer at Universal, a guy named Harv Bennett, who was doing those big miniseries like Rich Man, Poor Man and things like that. But he had just sold this new show on ABC called The $6 Million Man. And they needed scripts in a hurry. And he read my feature script and he said, I love this script. And I said, oh, great. He's going to, no, I can't help you get the movie made. But I really like your writing style, Kenny, and I think you could be a big asset to us. And I'd like to hire you to be a writing producer on the show. And I said, Harv, I am very flattered, but how about I just write and direct for you? Because producing is a pain in the ass. And besides, if you're producing a show, you got shows, so many episodes to worry about. You don't have time to go down on the stage and be directing the one that, And he said, I understand what you're saying, Kenny, but you have to understand how television works. In television, the producer is the guy that hires the writer and the guy that hires the director. And I said, oh, I could take that job. And that's what I did. And Harv sort of took me under his wing as a wonderful protege, and he was a tremendous mentor. And he recognized that I had some chops, and so I started producing and writing $6 Million Man, and brought in a number of my writer friends who were out of work and looking for work to try to get them hooked in as well. And then the Bionic Woman, what the heck happened because I went to when I first met with Harv, he said, I need some ideas for $6 million. That's what that's what I really brought you in for. And I said, well, why don't we do The Bride of Frankenstein? And he said, what are you talking about? I said, well, you've got a man that's a monster, basically. He's got monstrous legs and he's got monstrous arms and he's got a, little eye thing, but shouldn't there be a female counterpart? And he said, the Bionic Woman. And I said, yeah. He said, okay, will you write that? And I said, I'll write it. I get paid for writing. No. It was the only money I'd made all that year, I think, was that script. And so I wrote and we went around about it because $6 Million Man was sort of a mission show. It was very earnest. And Oscar Goldman was always saying, all right, Steve, you got to go in there and you got to save the hostages and, that kind of thing. And I said, this has to be a love story, Harv, and we can't do it that way. It's got to, So I kept leaning onto that, but they said, well, it's got to still have the 6 mil elements in it. And so I wrote the first 1 hour script, and they called me back from Harv called me back and said, okay, I read the script. Fred Silverman, president of ABC, has read the script. We love the script, but it's too dense. And I said, well, I told you that you're trying to pack too much shit into it. And he said, well, I said, all right, just tell me what you want me to cut. And they said, we don't want you to cut anything. We want you to make it longer. And I said, but you only have an hour. He said, no, it's going to be a two-parter. It was like one of the first two-parters that had ever been done on a 1 hour episodic show. And so, we need to make it long. I said, I have to write another script, a 2 hour script. And he said, yeah. And I said, do I get paid again? And he said, yes. And I was like, okay, I like this. And so in the course of doing that and casting Lindsay Wagner, and getting the whole show together and the tone of it. And I eventually bent them back around to where I could do the love story that I wanted to do with just a little bit of mission stuff over here, It was really about the love story. And it played very well. And at the end of the script, I left her in a sort of, had the injury from the the airplane, the parachute drop accident, but I didn't kill her off. I left her in a sort of a cryonic deep freeze kind of thing, and the studio said, no, we want her dead. And that word said, we want her dead. We don't want a lot of bionic people running around. We want to do a love story where the hero walks away alone from the cemetery at the end, And I said, I think it's a mistake, guys. And they said, no, really, seriously dead. Okay. Okay, guys, cerebral hemorrhage. She's gone, and then the show goes on the air. And the ratings for the $6 Million Man go way up, and on top of that, we're getting letters from people all over the country saying, wait a minute, what have you done to her? My favorite one came from the head of the psychology department of Boston University, who wrote and said, how dare you? How dare you create this brilliant female archetype, this role model for young women, this empowered woman, and just toss her away? What are you? You're insane, you people out there. And the studio was seeing those letters, but they were also really looking at the ratings, and they said, yeah, Kenny, why'd you kill her off anyway? Honest to God, Andre, Jeff, that's, they said, oh, they said, just bring her back. I said, great piece of cake, I'll bring her back. So I created some mumbo jumbo that allowed me to do that, but it also gave me the opportunity to say, okay, how can I use that and dramatically? And when I came up with the idea that she had survived and they had kept her alive and were working with her, but she had encountered some brain damage. And one of the things that happened was that she lost the memory that she had been in love with Steve Austin. So, it's like, oh, Steve, hi, it's nice to meet you. Meet me, I'm your guy. Sure. And so it put Lee Majors in a great position as an actor to be able to play all of that sadness with the audience just aching along with him, and meanwhile, Jamie was back, So at the end of the summer, in those days, maybe you boys are too young to remember reruns, but in the summertime, the show that had been on through the season, and it finished up in like April or May, they'd rerun over the summer episodes from the show to fill up the time, and the last rerun of the $6 Million Man that summer was my original Bionic Woman, the two-parter. And at the end of it, they said, tune in next week for the return of the Bionic Woman, and everybody in North America tuned in, and the ratings for the $6 Million Man went up into the top 10 for the first time. And so they said, this is great. We're so excited, yada, yada, yada. And Freddie Silverman called me from ABC and said, okay, Kenny, we want you to spin off the Bionic Woman into a separate series. And I said, but I'm already doing the series over here on. Yeah, well, you can keep doing that, but we'd like you to write and produce the Bionic Woman series at the same time. And doing an episodic television show, guys, is like living in a garbage disposal. When you have to write and produce two series at the same time, it's beyond a garbage disposal. I tried to do it for a while, and then finally I just said, I'm never going to have any time to direct if this keeps up. And I said, look, I can only do one show. Oh, I'll stay with the one that I created with Lindsay and the Bionic Woman. Lee was not thrilled about that, but he understood that was my creation. So, and he went with it. And we did that, and we did a couple of seasons of the Bionic Woman, and there was a while where the $6 Million, when I was doing both shows, where the $6 Million Man was the number one show in the country, and the Bionic Woman was the number 3 show in the country. And it was like nobody'd done that before. So it was an amazing experience, an amazing embrace by the audience out there, and an amazing opportunity for me as a writer and as a creator to really think about what I wanted to say to audiences and how the kinds of stories that I wanted to tell. So it was a big learning experience, guys. It was sort of like graduate school with pay. was kind of like what it was. And then in the midst of all of that, Frank Price, who was the president of Universal, called me one day and said, "Kenny, we've just acquired the rights to 5 of the Marvel comic superheroes. Which would you like to do? I'm giving you the first choice." And I said, "Pass it along to somebody else, Frank. Not what I'm interested in doing. I don't understand spandex and primary colors. Particularly guys that turn green." And it, but I was at the time that happened. I really was planning to say no to Frank because I just didn't want to. But Susie, my wife, the most literate person I've ever known, had given me a book to read that I had never read. It was called Les Miserables. Oh, that one. And so I had at the time the whole idea of Jean Valjean, the fugitive on the run from Inspector Javert, who was pursuing him. And I thought, okay, you know what? I could take a little bit of Victor Hugo here, a little bit of Robert Louis Stevenson, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and this ridiculous thing called The Incredible Hulk. If I could turn it into a psychological adult drama. And so I went back to Frank and said, "Okay, I'll do it. If you buy my idea and it's my casting, you're not going to shove some actor down on me that I don't want." And everybody just sort of leaves me alone and lets me do it. And Frank said, "Absolutely, Ken." The nice thing about having a couple of hit shows is that you get a little more respect in this town, and people are a little less eager to jump in and say, "Well, that's good, Kenny, but why don't you try to do it this way?" It's like, okay, if you like that, Kenny, so it's you got to roll with it when you can, and so that's what I tried to do. And when I was writing the script, I had Bix in mind from the very beginning. I had seen him in a TV play in 1973 called Steam Bath. You can still get it through Netflix, I think, where it was a 90-minute play where about this group of people in a steam bath and how they got there, but nobody could quite remember how they got there, and they didn't seem to be indoors to get out, and it was an amazing piece where Bill went through absolutely every emotional color and range that any actor could hope to have, all in 90 minutes, and it was just a stunning performance. And it had really stuck in my head. So that was 1973. So I'm writing the script for the Hulk 4 years later in 77. And I just had Bill in my head because I said, this is the guy that I need for this piece. He's real. He's famous. He's a star, which will bring more cred and respect to a ridiculous premise with a ridiculous title, And we sent the script to Bill. His agent told me when he handed Bill the script, Bill said, "I'm not even going to read a script. Not going to happen." And his agent said, "Read the script, Bill." Then he called me the next day and came barreling into my office and said, This is Kenny, this is great, because this is what we're going to do. I'm going to suffer. Actors love to suffer. It's the psychological drama. It's adults, it's not for kids. I said, "Exactly right, Bix." And so we shook hands, and that was the beginning of a wonderful relationship, as Bogart would say. And it was, and they did leave me alone and let me do it the way that I wanted to, and it was great. We ended up doing 5 years together, and doing a show that was about something. Because the Hulk in my head was always about self-control. That's what the show was really about, finding self-control. And we would try to do episodes wherever we could that involved Bix getting involved with someone who had their own Hulk going on inside them. His Hulk was anger, that would make him, lose touch with reality. With other people, it could be obsession, it could be greed, it could be just the kinds of things that all of us people feel on a daily basis, so that it was really based in how really people feel, and the enemy that is within people when they have some sort of internal torment going on that controls all of their behaviors. And so that was the great gift a bit about being able to do a show that was popular, but it's what they call a 4-quadrant hit. A 4-quadrant hit is when you get the adult women, the adult men, the adult women, the kids, and the teens. If you get all of those, you get a 4-quadrant hit. And interestingly, the largest segment of that for all of my shows, from the Bionic Woman through the Hulk, through V, through Alien Nation, the largest audience share I have is always adult women. And which is really weird and unusual for science fiction. I mean, science fiction and fantasy stuff is, 14-year-old boy stuff generally. That's how the network and the industries think about it. But because it had that universal 4-quadrant appeal, and the fact that women, who are the buying power in the country, the economic driver of the United States, it just was the perfect combination. And plus, I was working with people that I loved, and actors that I loved, that we never had any Hollywood nuts, stuff. I'll be in my trailer. I have the papers this morning, and nor with Lee either. With Lee Majors, I mean, Lee is quite a drinker in those days, and I was with him in Ojai one night, and he went through 2 bottles of wine, about 14 shots of tequila, and it was like he was drinking water. He was like talking to you guys are talking to me, and I have a half a glass of wine, and I'm gone. And I thought, oh my God, how's he going to get on the set tomorrow morning? The next day Lee's there, knows his lines, hits his marks, says his lines, but he had an ice pack stuck in the back of his jeans. So as soon as we'd say cut, he'd take the ice bag out and put it on his head and go, oh, what that tea was. But there was none of that with Bill, and we just had a tremendous time from the beginning to the end. We went through some tragedies together: the death of his 7-year-old son, and then later his late wife's or his former wife's suicide. And these were like stunning, shocking, experiences. But we had a good time, and it showed, I think, on the screen, because the shows were just embraced by so many people. We won some Emmy awards, and which was all the best. And also, I got some time to really do some good directing that I was very proud of, including the one with Mariette Hartley, where she won the Emmy for Best Actress in a Drama. And a lot of people in Hollywood said, "Wait a minute, the Best Actress award is going to an actress who just did the Hulk? Is that?" People began to recognize that the show was, had some deeper roots and better cred than a lot of people said they did. I'm sorry, I've rambled on. Forrest.
Okay.
Hearing this. My question is, when you kind of answered it already, but I was just wondering, is one of the reasons that you mostly, or at least the works that you get made that you've written, are mostly sci-fi, is that also so you can put things like social issues, but more, I guess, kind of hide it in plain sight? Like, okay, we're talking about this big sci-fi world adventure, but let me introduce maybe racism here. Let me introduce sexism here. Let me introduce this. Is that why you think you continuously find yourself writing in the science fiction genre?
Well, it's funny. I never set out to be the sci-fi guy, but what you say, Jeff, is true. That when you are writing in a fantasy vein, in just something that's slightly larger than life, you have the ability to speak working in metaphor, and clearly, so many of the characters that I've dealt with are larger than life characters who are living in the real world. We get so many letters from people in the LGBTQ community, for example, who really championed Jamie because she looked like one thing on the outside, but she was something else on the inside. And that's the same situation with Banner. On the outside, he presented one way, but there was this demon inside of him, And when you're working like that, when you're working in a sort of a contemporary mythology, you do have that ability. Alien Nation, of course, is the perfect example, because when Fox called me, Harris Cattleman was the head of Fox TV at the time, an old friend, And he said, Kenny, we just did a movie that didn't do very well, but I think there might be a series in it. Would you come take a look at it? And this was 1989. And I said, what's the movie? He said, well, it's called Alien Nation. I said, no, no, I don't want to do any more sci-fi stuff if I can avoid it. That's really, but he said, just come look at it. Just come look. For a friend, So I went over to Fox and I sat in the screening room by myself, and I'm looking at the movie, and it was kind of like Miami Vice with cone heads. And they had this great premise about this whole band, 250,000 people that had been bred as slaves and could survive anywhere. And he landed in the Mojave Desert, and they ended up moving to South LA, and it had a good idea, but it just stayed. It was still like a kind of buddy cop, white guy and a black guy, a white guy and a female, a white guy and an alien, And I thought, oh, God, but there was, and I couldn't get into the movie until I was just about ready to leave, about halfway through, walk out of the screening room and go say no thanks. And this one scene came up, and where the alien cop looked out the window. He was being picked up by his human partner, and the alien guy looked out at his family and waved goodbye to his family. And there's this one shot of this little alien woman, her two little alien kids, standing in front of what was clearly a hovel in a really bad section of town. And the bell went off in my head, and I went, oh, okay. I went back to the Fox execs, and I said, okay, you guys think you've got Lethal Weapon with aliens, right? And they said, yeah. I said, no. Let me do In the Heat of the Night. Let me do a piece that's about intolerance and prejudice and discrimination. And that's something that we can really dig into and get into. And that I would love to have the opportunity to do that. And they said, okay, they weren't always going to work, and but they gave me the leave to go ahead. And for me, it was great. I was born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. My mother and father had been born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and grown up in the South. All my relatives were in the South. But when I was 4 years old, they moved to Washington, D.C., my mother and father. He was still working in the Pentagon or something. And when the time came, and at the end of the war, World War II, my dad said, okay, Helen, it's time to go back to Little Rock now, and my mother, having gotten out of Arkansas, seeing what the real world was like, said, no, I'm going to stay here. And when they were divorced, I grew up with her. I'd go to Arkansas in the summer times when I was a kid, which was very strange to me because I'd be in a bus station, and in the South, there were 3 restrooms, not just 2. And there was men and there was women, and then it was colored. And I didn't get that. I remember seeing a water fountain once that had a little sign over it that said colored. And I was about 5 years old, and I went over and I turned the water on because I wanted to see what color the water was. I thought, this is the water. This has colored water in it. It was like, and the most potent one, I think, moment was I got on the bus with my grandmother in Pine Bluff, and I ran to the back because I always like to sit in the back where the big window is, and everybody on the bus, the whites in the front, the blacks in the back, they all went, and my grandmother said, Kenny, come up here. You can't sit back there. And I said, no, I like the big window because in Washington, D.C., hello, I can sit in the back of the bus and look out the big window. And she said, no, you have to come up here. And I said, but I argue, no, Kenny, up here now. And I walked back up to the front of the bus, and I never felt so discriminated against. No, it was like, and it wasn't until much later that I began to realize that, I see going on here. And also, I pretty soon realized in Maryland was a slave state too. The Mason-Dixon line is the Pennsylvania border, and that's why we hear about slaves having built the White House and the Capitol building because Maryland was a slave state. The District of Columbia was not, but good luck trying to sort that. And so I was raised in a household although in Maryland that was very anti-Semitic, very bigoted. I heard every racial slur at night at the dinner table. I was only an only child, so I didn't have anybody to say, "What do you think about this?" Yeah. But for some reason, guys, it just didn't stick. It just didn't make sense to me. And as I got older and realized more and more of just how what a detrimental thing this sort of attitude was, I just determined that I wanted to do it as much as I could to get away, not only get away from it, but to try to chip away against it. And that's what doing Alienation gave us a tremendous opportunity to do, because we could talk about the slags. And everybody thought that who's a minority recognized we were talking about them. We got we got great awards from the African American community, the Hispanic American community, the Asian American community, the LGBTQ. Everybody realized what we were doing, and we won awards and Emmys and all that sort of thing. But it was great to be able to do, and we had so much fun doing it. Something I can recommend to you and your viewers and listeners is, if you go on Google and Google Alien Nation, a family gathering, it comes up on a 30-minute piece that we did for one of the special features on one of the Alien Nation DVDs, where I had the whole cast come back with me, sit in my living room. This was 10, 12 years after we had done the show, and just tell their stories while I had 4 cameras rolling. And you see in that family gathering, Alien Nation, you Google that and it'll take you to it, and you can see what fun we had, what it was like, and how much we enjoyed the fact that we had a great group of people that was tightly knit as a company, but we were also doing something that had a societal meaning, that had a social substance to it, that was making people think about how they talk to people who are somebody other than what they look like. And it was a tremendous opportunity, and we just ran with it.
It's awesome.
So, Kenny, I'm going to just share a quick short story with you, and then it's going to actually lead to a question, and it's V related, because I know you've probably been bombarded with millions of questions about your experience creating that show. So, as I said, I saw it as a kid from my dad, and I was wowed by the special effects and Jane Badler eating a rat and, visitors. Yes, in fact, I have some stuff here too. I had this little Mark Singer figure from Brazil.
There you go. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff back there.
Yeah, I have your book, Second Generation.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
Great.
so, which I wish was made, but I understand
I'd still try.
television politics.
Yeah, we're still trying to get it made. We're working on it because the Second Generation is fun, because it really picks up the story 20 years later and what happened, and it gave me a chance to really expand it in ways that we're still hoping to do. But anyway, I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, not at all. So, yeah, I mean, I was wowed by everything that you did from just the technical standpoint. But then when I got into college and I rewatched the film and I watched with your commentary track on the DVD, I was starting to really get what you were trying to do about what would happen if fascism actually came to America, and using the visitors as the substitute for the Nazis based on the Sinclair Lewis novel.
Right.
And, that just still for years has resonated with me, with everything that's gone on. And I know we don't get too heavy into politics, but given your week,
Just open the window today, 2025 in February. We're there, guys. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it, as Santayana said. And it's really, and I can't tell you how many people have drawn that parallel to me of late, about how prescient V was. The same way that Huxley's novel about 1984, was like, yes, yes. You tell them that it's true. You tell them that black is white, and pretty soon you begin to believe that black is white, and pretty soon there's no memory that black wasn't white. And we are in a horrifying situation now, where too many people are capitulating, who are the people who are in power, who should be checking against it. As a matter, it's in V. The scene where right after Donovan has discovered the depth of Diana's horrors, and the people entombed, and how the leader, whom we haven't seen yet, wants it all, wants all the water, wants all the people, and it's at the cost of, it didn't matter about humanity. And I wrote a line where Donovan says to Martin, the sympathizer, how did somebody like that get to be your leader? And Martin answers something like charisma, circumstances, and not enough of us stood up to speak up against it until it was too late. And here we are.
No, see, that exactly was my question for you, which is, if when you look back at the original V, is there anything now that you did then that disturbs you with what's going on now?
Oh, only that people weren't paying more attention. I mean, certainly when we did V in 1982, 1983, it was released. We were not facing a crisis like that in the country, nor could we even imagine it. And that's what just drove me to write it, because Sinclair Lewis's novel doesn't obviously. It was his novel written in 1935. He was talking about the rise of fascism in Germany and Italy at the time, which was on the rise. And how it can't happen here. This is America. Yada yada. Yeah, watch this, pal. And it really ended with somebody beginning an occupation. And the original screenplay that I wrote before I wrote V was called Star Mornings, and it was about exactly what has happened in this country in the last couple of years. This grassroots thing that seems like it's working at a lower level, and then all of a sudden, whoop, it just consumes you. And when I read that, I was thinking, this was 1982. I was thinking, we've never faced any challenge like that. I wonder how would my pal Steve Cannell, who created 18 and Rockford Files and all of that, Steve Cannell's license plate was "What if?" And I always love that, great license plate. What if? Because that's where it all starts. You're sitting there, you're thinking, what if one day there was something where all of a sudden we had a sea change in life, in our world, and an uber power just sort of rolled in on top of us, like the Nazis rolled into Europe in World War II, before World War II. And how do individual people react? And that's what really intrigued me. And I just set my sights on trying to figure that out. I did a lot of research about the rise of the Third Reich and how it had happened, and how they had allowed it to happen, and how Hitler had helped to engineer it to happen. And then where it went once the Nazis would come into the Low Countries or into Belgium and say, "Hi, we're the Nazis. We're the new guys in town." We've got, the English are going to start mining in the channel pretty soon, that the boats aren't going to go through, but we're going to take care of that, and we're here to be your friends, and all that stuff, which was brilliantly done. And the lies were told, the big lies were told over and over and over and over again, until they became part of the texture. And that happening really intrigued me, that idea then. And how people would react, because I always saw it as there were clearly three groups that they divided into. There were the collaborators, who would get on board and support it, even if they knew it was bad for the world and their other human beings. But they would collaborate for their own good and enrichment. The second type were the ones that would just try to keep their head down, and hope, well, if I don't, then they won't bother me. If I'm not Jewish, they won't take me away, or a scientist in this case, or gee, that's sort of happening now, isn't it? And then the third group, of course, are the people that say, no, this power is being abused, and we have to fight back against it. And they become, of course, the heroes of the resistance. And that's what I wanted to see them. And I didn't want generals and presidents. You'll notice there's none of that like in V.
Yeah.
They later tried to do it with Independence Day. It was like, a quick side story. I was coming out of an award ceremony somewhere, and these two guys ran up to me and Susie. They came running up to us in the parking lot. Maybe you heard this story. And they said, Kenny, can we just say hello? We've always wanted to meet you. I'm Dean Devlin, and this is Roland Emmerich. And I said, oh, guys, so nice to see you. Where's my cut of the 400 million? Let's say, guys, he used my posters even. I mean, the graphics, it was like, holy cow. But it was the opportunity to dig into that human reaction to it. And I got to tell you, the most the day in my career that it was the proudest day I ever had in my career, and it's never been eclipsed. It was the first time I had 4 editors working on V because we were working so fast and under such duress to get it made as quickly as possible because Brandon Tartikoff needed it because NBC was in the toilet, yada yada. Um, and and so I had 4 editors working, and everybody was doing bits and pieces of the whole jigsaw puzzle, and not even me had seen all of it together except in my head, you know. And finally, I said, "Look, we got to just tape it together, guys, and see what we've got right at this point, so we know what it's looking." Because each one of the segments had been finished, but we hadn't. We taped it together. We sat in small screening room 2, right outside of Jack Warner's office at the Warner Brothers, and the 4 assistants, 4 editors, and their assistants, and I just sitting in the room, ran for 3.5 hours, and there was no sound effects, there was no visual effects at all. They were just black slugs that said "scene missing, scene missing, scene missing." There was no music, there was no dialogue, it was raw. It was the raw footage of the actors working. And it just, when the lights came up, we were all sitting there going, "Holy cow, we have really done something here." It was like just staggeringly good because of the human emotions that were all working. And my actors had just every one of them absolutely hit the mark. And there was not a weak performance. There was not a, and it was, you know, I was really, really excited about it because I knew that all the rest of it, Jeff and Andre, all the rest of it, the visual effects and the spaceships and the, you know, reptilian faces, which, you know, it was so terrible to try to do. I knew that was all going to be gravy. That was just, you know, going to be icing on the cake, but we had baked the cake, you know. And and I remember calling Brandon right from the screening room and saying, "Hey, we just saw the whole thing. You're going to be really happy." He said, "That's great." He said, "That's great. I'm so excited." I said, "Yeah, there's one problem." He said, "What's that?" Because when I was writing it, Brandon said, "How long do you think this, Kenny? At 6 hours? It feels like," I said, "I think I can do it in 4." Okay, so we made it to be a 4-hour. That's what we're going to do. I said, "Brandon, with the commercials, it's going to be 4 hours and 15 minutes. And he said, "Well, we'll just have to trim it back a little." I said, "Brandon, this is not Kenny protecting his golden words because I'm great at killing my babies in the editing room. Many times I've had to do that. But I said, Brandon, none of us sitting here can think of anything we can take out of this film that won't damage the film." I said, "Can you just come over and take a look at it tomorrow?" And he came over by himself, no entourage or anything. He sat down in the screening room with us the next day, went through the whole thing. Lights come up. Hmm. He's sitting there like that, you know. I'm going, "No, can we go outside?" I said, "Yeah, sure, let's go outside." So we went outside, and he's walking around. Going, I said, "What are you thinking?" "Oh," he said, "I'm thinking that I got to go get all of the 250 affiliate stations on the phone at the same time and ask them if they will give me 15 more minutes because we can't cut a frame out of this." And I said, "Can you do that?" He said, "Beats the shit out of me." How have you? But I'm going to try. And he did, and they all agreed. And the first night of V ran from 9 until 11:15. You know, and people around the country were going, "Wait a minute, so what time is the news?" It's like drawn in. They didn't want to tune out. And so he was a man of his word, and he stepped up and made it happen like that. And it never would have happened originally without Brandon because he had the foresight. We'd worked together before, and when I came up with the idea, he just loved it and really wanted to do it. And he, you know, saw it through all the way to the end. And it became the piece that you saw because of his single-minded determination that it was going to really be an important piece of material. The We created an advertising campaign, you know, where I went to Steve Somer, who was Steve Somer had been the head of advertising at CBS when I was doing the Hulk, and we had a lot of fights over there because he would put out, you know, he put out the first ad that he put out about the Hulk coming on the air was a full page thing with Lou Ferrigno, you know, grip on the loose, and about at the bottom it said, "Starring Bill Bixby." One time, "Steal Bill Bixby off the ceiling." And I went to I said, "Steve, you are missing the," and we, you know, so we bought it. I said, the kids are going to come. We know about that. It's an adult drama. If you don't sell it that way, you're going to blow it. And we went around and around for 8 years, 5 years on the Hulk. Oh, Steve was a constant thorn in my side. So now I'm doing V, and Brandon called me one day in the midst of the post-production. And he said, just wanted to let you know I hired this great new guy to do ad pub for NBC. Who is it? Steve Somer. Oh, no. So I went to Steve's office over there and I said, okay, look, you don't like me because you think I meddle in what you do and you think you know best about what you do. And I think you probably do know best about what you do. But I have problems with you, Steve, because I think sometimes you miss the essence of what we've got and what we're doing. And I said, let me just throw out one idea to you, okay, for about the advertising and promotion. About 3 weeks before the show goes on the air, put up posters on bus stations and subways and billboards all over the country that just say the alien visitors, our friends. And put people, it's like the Nazis. I said, did you ever see the Nazi propaganda posters with the Wehrmacht soldiers with the little Dutch girls sitting on their shoulders? Hi, we're the Nazis. We're pals. I said they would put those up all over Europe, and then very quickly they would have a big B painted over it, defaced from the resistance. And I said, so put up a propaganda poster, doesn't say anything about the show or the network or anything, just it's a propaganda poster. And then the second week before the show airs, just send out kids around the country and have them spray paint big V's over it. Deface your own poster. And then we put up a little banner in the corner that says the battle begins on NBC May 1st, And Steve, bless his heart, came out of his chair and exploded into raptures of yes, 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 money, money, money. And he did it all over the country. And it was, somebody said, that sounds like the first viral campaign. And in a way, I guess it was. And at the same time, we created a countdown. This part was Steve's idea, and I totally agreed immediately, was every day, only 24 days until they arrive, only 22 days before they, we didn't show very much, but it was they're getting closer. And did that combined with the poster campaign, and then the reviews started coming in a week before from all of the major critics in the country: the New York Times, the New York Daily News, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune. Every major critic in the country just was rapturous about what we'd done, and how it was. I mean, this Christian Science Monitor actually sort of even compared it to Orwell, and I thought, oh wow, I'll take that. It's because they realized what we were doing, and all of that combined to get us to a rating that was unthinkable in those days. We had a 40 share, which meant 40% of the people in the country in North America were tuned into V. 80 million people were watching. And it was the NBC's highest show in like 2.5, 3 years. And it is still today the highest rated work of science fiction in television history. There have been other shows, certainly like Star Trek and yada yada, that have gone on for longer. But V, as a single entity unit, the highest rated highest rated work of sci-fi. And that, I can't complain about working in sci-fi, Jeff, and right. But it takes that kind of, the mail that I get too. I mean, I get fan mail from all over the world from about all of my shows, but the stuff that comes in from V, you combine the Hulk and the Bionic shows and Alien Nation together, the stuff from V is like 10, 20 times that much. It's just constantly, because people all over the world, particularly overseas, have recognized what we were talking about and what we were doing. And it's come up again now, obviously, in the times that we are in now, when there's a really dangerous strain of fascism that is growing in the United States. And Pash Patel is gonna be what is it, is gonna be the head of the deal.
FBI director.
Yes, he's a QAnon believer. I mean, this is scary times. And there was also an article in Susie said about, it was 1921, I think, 22. She said, "Did you see the front page of the LA Times today?" And I said, "No." She said, "You better take a look at it because there's a story about you on the front page of the LA Times." I said, "What are you talking about?" And it was about how QAnon had co-opted the idea of people who were really lizards underneath. Geez, that it had become part of their mantra, part of their thing, and it was an article, that went on about that, and they stolen some stuff from a movie that Ridley Scott did, White Squall, where they had a statement on the mast of the ship that the kids were training on. It said, "Where one goes, all go." Oh, and that's the motto for QAnon. And they, so fade out, fade in. Last year, I got a call from a guy at the it's gone out of my head. How does that go out of your head? The Vanity Fair. Oh, that magazine. Yeah, Anthony Bresnik at Vanity Fair called and said, "You know about this QAnon stuff?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I hear about it all the time. I get letters from people saying to me, don't you? You know." Yeah, yeah. And I have to explain patiently, "No, you're crazy." And the people who are, professing that are crazy. Yeah, and the Vanity Fair did this big article last year on my website, which is just kennethjohnson.us, kennethjohnson.us is my website. You can see the Vanity Fair article because we really got into it. We talked for about 12 hours, Anthony and I, and because there was a lot of behind the scenes drama going on in the making of V as well. But it was, it was an important statement to me to make at the time. And now when I see us sliding slower, more and more into 1984, into where people are only getting their information from one single source that is lying to them and was sued for lying to them and paid a quarter or $750,000 for lying about the Dominion voting machines at Fox News, all of that stuff. But again, it's the same story of V. It's the big lie, and you tell it over and over again, as Stephen Miller will tell you, standing behind Mr. Trump. It's terrifying times, and when the vast majority of the Republican Party are behind the scenes saying, "Yeah, this is not really good," but they're not standing up and saying anything. They're not saying no. They're not saying stop. I mean, just this morning there was, and I'm hoping that a groundswell will begin to happen in this country in time, so that Project 2025 doesn't end up being the rest of the country's life, however long that life may be for our country. So it's scary times.
Fortunate, right? Um, I that was a heavy subject. Mine is a little lighter. I was just wondering, how did we've talked about this movie before, but how did you get involved with Steel, the movie?
Oh gosh, it's my old friend, a couple of old friends called me who were the producers of the picture, and said, "Kenny, we've got this. Warner Brothers owns this comic from part of the DC venue, thing, Steel. It's about a black guy who becomes kind of a hero." I said, "Okay." So far, I'm on board because there had not yet really been certainly not a Black Panther by any means. No, but even something that was of that kind of thing. But when Quincy Jones calls you, you got to pay attention because he's a class act, and we'd known each other in the past. And I said, "Well, what's the story?" And he said, "Well, it's about a black guy in the army, creates some weapons that are really bad. When he gets out of the army, these street kids have them, so he makes a suit of steel and to try to fight back." And I said, "That could be fun. Let me try to get into that with you. But by the way, we need it really fast. And I know, by the way," and I said, "Well, who's starring in it?" He said, "Well, we've got Shaquille O'Neal attached to play the lead." And I said, "That's great. Who's starring in the picture?" Well, and they said, "Well, Shaq." I said, "Have you seen his other movies, guys? He's only done a couple, and they're not exactly box office big hits, Oh, I said, no, but he's perfect for this. I said, I agree that he is perfect to play the character. Christopher Reeve was perfect to play the character of Clark Kent and Superman, but he was surrounded by Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman. And, it's like, who's going to open the picture? And I kept fighting with the studio about this because they just were convinced that they didn't need that. And it was a very, very frustrating experience. A couple of times we really went around and around with the guy who was Bonaventura. Lorenzo de Bonaventura was co-president of the Warners at the time. And I said, Lorenzo, and that movie's not going to open. And I said, no, it's going to be great. Yeah. And what I realized looking back at it, it was sort of a poor man's Iron Man, but without Robert Downey Jr. And $100 million. And I had to write it in like 3 weeks while Shaq was incidentally at the Olympics before he started his $250 million contract with the Lakers, who were also very freaked out that he was going to do an action picture and maybe sprain his ankle or something. And it was to help Quincy out, and Quincy said, "Man, we're going to try to get it started." They kept good mouthing me all the way along, but it never stood up and hired an actor or a star that could. I said, "Why did you put Arnold Schwarzenegger into Batman?" That's because you knew that George Clooney was not going to open a Batman movie. I need Arnold. Get me Arnold to be the bad guy. And they just didn't want to spend the money. They it was short-sighted. And we had we put together a pretty good little movie that I was really proud of, and Shaq did a really reasonably good job. I sent a directing coach to him, while a guy, Ben Martin, had been one of my classmates at Carnegie, terrific director and acting coach, and I sent him hired him to go to. I think they were in Atlanta, where the Olympics were, to get with Shaq between games and help to work him up as an actor, so that we'd have something to work with, and we had a good cast surrounding him. But I said, guys, it's not going to open without a star, and so we made the movie, and it ended up looking. I remember when Lorenzo and Billy Gerber, the co-presidents, saw it in my director's cut. The lights came up, and they turned around and they said, "Wow, man, Shaq's an actor. You made him an actor." And I said, "Well, it was a lot of, yeah, well, it was okay. It was a lot of one line at a time sometimes, but we got it." And they said, "But wait a minute, why is this? How much did we spend on this money?" And I said, "On this picture." And they said, "Well," I said, "you gave me $21 million, but I brought it in for 20, not just over 20, so under budget." And they said, "Well, why does it look like a $60 million movie?" And I said, "Is that what I'm supposed to do?" Imagine what it would look like if you had given me, maybe 40 or $50 million, just so maybe we could have hired somebody to be a star. Movie. And all right, so no, but it's still good. And we went out, they previewed it around the country, 95 screenings around the country, private screenings for preview audiences. The preview audiences loved it. The family audiences loved it. They got like 90 percentile ratings, correct, really high. And they're going, see, and I'm going, see, what? They didn't pay to get in. Those are free, Let's see if anybody's going to pay to come see Shaq. And so the weekend before our show, our movie opened, they were having another premiere. Oh no, you know what it was? Yeah, the weekend before it opened, we had our premiere on Hollywood Boulevard at Grauman's Chinese Theater. I mean, who doesn't want to have their premiere at Grauman's, right? And we were there, and the street was closed off, and a big crowds and all of that. And Shaq comes in, and a lot of Magic Johnson, and a lot of other people, and a few people, and everybody's all hoopla and all that. And I heard that same weekend, Warner Brothers, same company, same marketing team. That weekend, they had opened a movie called Conspiracy Theory, starring Mel Gibson and Julia Roberts at the peak of their careers, and it didn't open. They were expecting like $40-50 million opening, and it was like 10 or 12, and it was like, and I thought, oh my God, they've got Roberts, and I got Shaq and a basketball player. And this movie's going to open and that one didn't. Oh my God. And sure enough, I mean, the next weekend when our movie did open, you could have shot a cannon off any of the theaters. There was nobody there. Nobody wanted to pay to see Shaq do anything. And except play basketball, sure. It was very frustrating. There were many times I wish I had walked away from it because I sensed it was going to be disastrous. But I didn't. I'm not that kind of guy, and I felt that I had committed myself to Quincy to help see it through. And because of all the glad handing, I thought, well, maybe at the last minute they'll come through, but they didn't. And Billy Gerber was fired as the president of Columbia of Warner's, which is interesting because I never saw Billy until I ran the film for him at the end. Lorenzo was there all the time. Lorenzo, man, he knows like Donald Trump. He's a Teflon. And Billy was fired. And a couple of months after the movie opened and didn't open, I called Billy and I said, I took him to lunch. And I said, what were you thinking? And I mean, it's not like you haven't done this before. And he said, no. Up until the week before you started filming, Lorenzo and I were thinking, well, maybe we ought to bring in another actor that's a star And I said, and why didn't you? And they said, well, truth be told, because the marketing department came to us and said they thought they could sell more toys with Shaq than they could with, somebody else. And I said, not if the movie doesn't open. God. What are you, crazy? And yeah, so not only did Billy Gerber get fired after that debacle, but the whole marketing department got fired. And but that didn't help the movie, or my life. It was very frustrating. But on the plus side was I had a good time working on it. I had a lot of my family crew from the Hulk and Bionic and all of those shows working on it with me. Shaq was great. And a real stand-up guy in every sense of the word, and I loved working with him. And so generous and funny, and dedicated. He knew, not only did Shaq know his lines in the movie, he knew everybody's lines. And I'm not kidding. If somebody went up, Shaq could tell him what their line was. So anyway, that's the long and short of it. And it's still a movie that I'm proud of. And could it have been better if we had a better cast and stronger? Sure. And could I have written a better script if I had more than 3 weeks? Maybe. Probably that too. But anyway, it's something that I still look back at, and I'm pleased that I was involved.
All right. Well, I know our time is getting a little short, so I'm just going to limit my question just to 2. What's the status of the reboot movie that you have the rights for? And can I be an extra visitor if it happens? You don't have to pay me. I just want to be in the background in a uniform.
You have no idea how many people have volunteered for that, Andre. And how many? And I have a list, and I will put you on the list because absolutely. Hey, first, it's when I discovered the rights got. Because I was the sole writer on the original, I was given, I earned what is called separation of rights. So Warner Brothers owns the television rights. They can do whatever they want in television, and they have tried several times, as you know, and it's been disastrous each time. And but they have the TV rights. I own everything else. Now, the publishing rights had gotten a little tangled up back in the early 80s because it turned out that they had published a bunch of novelizations that they had never gotten the rights to do for me, so it was sort of a messy thing. And I sort of got it in my head, oh my God, I guess even though I have separated rights, I guess Warner's is just always going to have their, finger in the pie or something. So I just set it aside for over a decade or more, a couple of decades. And then the guy, David Foster, was the producer of Short Circuit 2. And one day, several years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, I guess, David called me and said, hey, look, why don't we do V as a movie? And I said, well, is it a rights problem? Warner Brothers, blah, blah. And he said, oh, I don't know. Let me think about that. And he called me back and said, come on, I want you to meet me at the Coffee Bean on Beverly Drive in Beverly Hills. Just come over and meet me or have a cup of okay. So I go over, and David is a wonderful, robust Hollywood god, and he's great at selling stuff, and not a really good producer at all. But but none of can get it all together, you know. Now, when I was going to do Short Circuit 2, I sat down for lunch with John Badham, who directed the first movie. And I'm so excited to be working with David Foster as a producer. It's the first time I could be able to just direct and not have to carry all the producing weight as well, you know. And I said, "Tell me about David." And Badham said, "Well, David's a lot of fun. He got great stories about the people that he was he was a publicist for for Peter Sellers and for Steve McQueen and all that." So I don't care about all that. How is he as a producer on the film? And Badham said, "David is a producer." He said, "Kenny," and this is a quote, David Foster as a producer doesn't know his ass from a hot rock." I said, "What are you talking about? Wasn't he there with you?" He said, No, he was never on the set one day. You know, I said, "Well, who produced the movie?" And Badham said, "Who do you think produced the movie?" You know, he did it like I am so used to doing. And I was so disappointed, but because it was that way. And fortunately, Gary Foster, his son, was along and really did end up helping me a lot. But David's big, Hollywood straight tricky baby kind of guy, you know. And so he met me at the coffee bean. He said, "Okay, so who owns the rights to V as a movie?" And I said, "Well, I told you, David, it's tangled with Warner's." And he said, No. And he's dialing his cell phone. He said, listen. And he said, I'm calling Dan Fury. Dan Fury is the head of business affairs for motion pictures at Warner Brothers. And he had already talked to him. And he's on the phone. He goes, "Hey, Dan, that's this Foster. Listen, I want you to tell Kenny who owns the rights to V." He put the right, you know, puts it up to my face. And David Fury said, Dan Fury said, "Kenny, you own the rights. You have separated rights. You own the motion picture rights." Really? You know? So let's go make a movie. All right. So Foster gets us set up with meetings at all the major studios, literally all of them, and all of them said the same thing. Basically, he said, "Wow, we love this. We want to spend lots and lots of money, and we want to, you know, bring you. We want to. Yes, we got to do V-Man, and you can produce. We might even let you write, and but for a director, you know, we're sort of thinking, you know, somebody, you know, Michael Bay kind of, you know."
Oh God.
No, and I said, No. Thanks, guys, but no, you know? And, and there'd be this pause. Now, when you say no in Hollywood, this is what often happens. They go, "Okay, we understand. We understand. We really get it. How much money do you really?" And I'd have to say, "You guys don't understand. Yeah, I never got into this business to make money or to be famous or any of that stuff. I got in it to tell stories and to direct. And I'm not going to hand off a baby to foster parents that I don't know or respect to take it over for me, you know." And they would keep trying to up the ante, you know. And I mean, they were into really mid 7-figure dollars just for the rights, you know. And I just said, and I went through that with really every one of the major studios. And finally I said, "Oh no," I went through enough of them to finally say, "Okay, I'm not going to do any more of those meetings because it's a waste of time. Let's try to set it up as an independent picture." And David got involved with that. But David was always a big studio guy, and he didn't know from independent pictures. And so we, you know, agreed to go our separate ways on it. And I was got involved with a couple of younger guys who had done a lot of independent pictures. And that's what we've been trying to do to get it. And we've actually had it set up 4 times. Once with an Indian group from Mumbai, once with a Chinese guy who had, we could see proof of funds of over $300 million. We just had to get them from Beijing into the country in a legal fashion. And we spent almost a year trying to negotiate that until finally we realized he was just scared. And he literally said, "I am afraid my country will put me in jail," even though he was a member of the Xi Jinping's organization. That was crazy. So that didn't happen. There was another one. And then along came this guy named Charles Hensley. He was brought to us by Sean Stone, Oliver Stone, this director. Sean is his son, a great guy. And he hooked up with this guy named Charles Hensley, who was a billionaire. Back in the 90s, he had created Zicam, a nasal spray, and made $1 gazillion off of that. And he now had bought the rights to Desilu Studios, and he was going to direct it, and he wanted V to be his flagship piece. that was going to do it. And he actually stepped up and put some money on the table, a great big chunk of change, to option it for 6 months while he got the rest of the money together. And we said, oh my gosh, this is actually going to happen. And we started pre-production. We started concept art and pre-visualizations and all that. And we're rolling along. But when's the money going to start coming in, the rest of it, you know? And at about that point, the Hollywood Reporter did this big expose about how Mr. Hensley was not what he professed to be. Actually, a Ponzi scheme where he was using title of V to lure investors to put money into his company.
Oh my God.
Company at all, you know, and CBS sued him because he really didn't own Desilu as he said he did. And it was like, it was back to square one. And we were still, you know, eagerly pressing to get it done, to do it as a trilogy, to do a remake of the original, which is clearly brings the movie up into the 21st century, but is a very faithful retelling. It's not a reimagining; it's a revival, really, is what it is. That brings it up into the 21st century with all the bells and whistles that would including like cell phones and social media and all that sort of stuff. And it would be the first of the 3 movies, the second and third being taken from the second generation novel. And so that's where we are. And we're still we're working the phones and you know, and it may never happen. But I decided, you know, Susie, my wife, really put it into context for me. She said, Kenny, it's really a simple question. All you have to ask yourself is, would you rather the movie never got made than got made wrong by the wrong people? And that's what has been my bellwether. Yeah, no thanks, but no thanks. You know, I just fielded another in the last couple of weeks. There's other big group in Hollywood that wanted to take it and run with it, but step over here, Kenny, and let us handle it. No, sorry, guys. But there has been actually a big new audio production done by this company called Big Finish in England. It just released, as a matter of fact, this January. They came to me with the idea of doing it as an audio production. I said, does anybody, well, like a radio play, you know, on CDs and digital? And they said, yeah, that's what we do. I said, is there a market for that? They said, well, we've been doing it for 20 years with Doctor Who and Star Trek. And I said, oh, really? And so once we could come to an agreement that I was going to have creative control over the quality of it, then we went to town, and the first 3 episodes have just been released in audio, and so it's yeah, you can find it online. The Big Finish is the name of the company, and they're out of England, but you can still buy it in the U.S., I think, too. So. And it's been rave reviews, and it's gotten huge press over there, and so it's just a sign that we know they're out there. We know that people want to see it, and the reviewers for the audio production have said, "God, it's so great because they didn't muck it about. They didn't mess with it. They just brought it up to today, and which is a testimony to the fact that we know how to do it. We get to show it. So." For all of those, for any folks listening, feel free to contact us and you know, and help it happen. You know, but thanks so much for taking the time. I'm sorry I didn't mean to spend so much time, but
No, yes. Loved hearing your story.
oh well, that's good. Well, you'll be welcome on the set, Jeff, and so will you, Andre. And
Thank you.
just keep me posted and give me a heads up when you're going to release this, just so that I know and I can let the world know.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm hoping this movie happens because we need it now more than ever.
Yeah, really do. We really do. Thanks, guys.
Should I really appreciate this.
Take care.
I never thought I would be able to talk to one of the people who not only kept me entertained and fascinated by their work and imagination, but also helped teach me, and obviously Andre and many others, as kids as well as whatever age, to dream, but also explore the consequences of those worlds and advancements of those dreams and fantasies, but also who have a humanity for others, and always be careful where you wander and who you trust. And above all, be a storyteller if you're going to create, and how it affects others. So I just want to thank Mr. Kenneth Johnson and say how much we appreciate you and your work.
If you like this review, please be sure to like and hit subscribe to be alerted to new episodes in the future.